Part 26C, the volcano-like craters of the Moon on the flat Earth. You remember this one? Pressure, release. Pressure, release.
The red and blue arrows shown here indicate magnetic orientation and the direction of the flow of matter in and around the magnetic bowl. The red arrows indicate magnetic north, and the blue arrows indicate magnetic south. Here we see a magnetic sphere being used to reveal the shape of the confinement dome. Here we see a string of magnets being used to show the magnetic field lines in and around the magnetic bowl. Here we see an example of the ejection forces that exist within the magnetic bowls. Then we see that this ejection force can be extremely strong. So just as we see in the plasma experiments in the vacuum chamber, we see that these ejection jets start at the top of the confinement dome and shoot out of the bowl in line with the axis of the bowl.
So remember what the moon is. It's just a confinement dome. And you're looking from the top down, looking at it directly straight down on top of the confinement dome. So here is the largest of the volcano-like craters, the Tycho crater. And we're going to focus in on this so you can see the debris field around the structure. And this is a pressure release point on their ice dome. So when the pressure release happens, matter and material and gases get released through that pressure release point, and some of it will deposit back down on the surface of the outer surface of the ice dome. The blue arrows indicate where the majority of the ejecta lands, and the red arrows are from the furthest extent of that ejecta. Here is the history of the pressure release ejections that have happened on the confinement dome or the ice dome of the moon. Here's 7 major ones that can be clearly seen from any picture of the moon. Some are larger, some are smaller, and that's what I've been trying to say throughout the series with these events. They're not all the same. It depends on the pressure and the changeover, and that determines the size of these pressure releases. So for all you real thinkers out there who just watched the clip, David LaPlante saying that it happens on the central axis at the top of the confinement dome, you'll say to yourself, well, how come it's not there, Brian? How come these are scattered all over the place? How can it be the history of these pressure releases if it's not at the central point of the dome? It's because the expansion part of this whole model. It expands And that's why they're scattered and they're moving away from that central axis point. So the expansion I will get into in greater detail in the next video, 26D, when I talk about the Mara and how the Mara is formed. But the quick and easy answer to the expansion is simple, because it's life. Everything is life, and all life grows. Through the growth process, there is an expansion process, and that's why these domes, these confinement domes, the areas between the flip ring and the choke ring expand and grow, because it is all life. And when you understand that everything is life, living or deceased, then you'll be able to see the big picture a lot easier. So that's where the expansion comes from. It's just life growing. The cell that you are on, the neuron that you're on, is growing. And that growth has consequences to the things that are already there. Okay, now back to the volcano-like pressure release craters. Now, don't get confused between these pressure release volcano-like structures and volcanoes that we know down here. Volcanoes we know down here are ejecting predominantly matter. So it's ejecting matter the pressure has been built up in between the flip ring and the choke ring. And that's what the volcanoes are releasing the pressure of there. Completely different than the one at the top of our dome when it releases, or the one at the top of the moon's dome. So the material that's primarily released at the top of our dome and being released at the top of the moon's confinement dome is predominantly water, because the water is above. There are gases that escape during this through the atmosphere, and there is matter that comes up through a vortex that's created. Sucks up loose things that are on the surface, will get drawn up, but predominantly this is a water geyser type pressure release. And that's why when you look at this and you look at the Tycho crater, that's predominantly water refrozen. So now we get back to the rapture, right? The rapture is a twofold event. The first part of the rapture is the EM field reversal, so there's nothing keeping you down on the ground. The second part is a vortex created and a suction up to the top part of our dome to let ejecta go through that dome in the pressure release. So obviously, one would not want to get caught up in a spiraling vortex and getting taken out of our dome through a pressure release. It's not good, and you don't want any part of that. So that's what the rapture is. So you start floating because the EM field goes down, and then you get sucked up because of the pressure release that's happening at the top of our dome.